What if solving a simple classroom math problem could turn you into the government's most wanted asset? Mason thought he was just late for class, until he cracked an equation so dangerous it could unlock the world's most powerful secrets. But when agents came knocking, Mason realized this was no ordinary mistake. What happens next will leave you speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The room was already suffocatingly silent when Mason Parker shoved open the door to Advanced Applied Mathematics, his backpack hanging from one shoulder like an afterthought. A dozen pairs of eyes turned, some smirking, others shaking their heads. At the front, Professor Graves, known across campus for his sharp tongue and military-like discipline, lifted a brow and checked the clock. 22 minutes late, he announced, voice like gravel scraping against stone. Even for you, Parker. That's impressive. The class chuckled under their breath. Mason, unfazed as always, gave a lopsided grin and took a slow step inside, the air thick with judgment. His classmates saw him as nothing more than the slacker who coasted on minimum effort and maximum sarcasm, the kind who barely scraped through tests and never seemed to care. Yet today, there was a flicker in his eyes, a spark that wasn't there before. Graves didn't waste a second. Without another word, he picked up a piece of chalk and scribbled 2 equations on the board. They weren't ordinary. Even at a glance, the room knew. These were notorious, considered borderline unsolvable, used only in advanced competitions and doctoral dissertations. The professor capped his performance with a smirk. "Since you've wasted our time, solve these before class ends." A wave of laughter spread like wildfire. Everyone expected a spectacular crash and burn. Mason wasn't known for brilliance. He was known for excuses. But instead of shrinking back, Mason took a long look at the board. His smile faded, but not from fear. Without hesitation, he strode forward, grabbed the chalk, and began to write. The room stilled. The tapping of pens, the whispered gossip. It all died. Mason's hand moved swiftly, confidently, as though the numbers weren't obstacles but old friends returning home. Students exchanged glances. Some leaned forward, squinting. It wasn't just that he was attempting the problems. It was how fluid, how precise, how impossibly natural his work appeared. Graves crossed his arms, observing intently. He expected a struggle, maybe even a panicked retreat. Instead, Mason finished the first equation with seamless logic, checked it once, then turned to the second. This one, harder by far, was conquered in under 3 minutes. Mason stepped back and placed the chalk gently on the ledge, arms crossed, leaning casually against the board. "All done," he said, voice steady. The silence was deafening. Professor Graves's eyes scanned the board, his weathered fingers tracing each line like a detective solving a case. His smirk melted into slack-jawed disbelief. This wasn't just correct, it was elegant. Too elegant. Students were now craning their necks, eyes wide. Mason Parker, the so-called underachiever, had just unraveled 2 equations that left even top students stumped. "Where did you learn this?" Graves asked, voice stripped of its usual steel. There was no condescension, only disbelief. Mason shrugged, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "Figured it out," he replied, as if it were nothing. The professor blinked, glancing between Mason and the board. For the first time in the old man's career, he was speechless. And the class knew, in that unsettling moment, that Mason Parker was hiding something far bigger than just talent. Professor Graves stepped forward, still processing the impossible, but determination quickly replaced his shock. His pride and curiosity wouldn't let this moment slide. "Let's make it official then," he said, grabbing the chalk once more. The room tensed as he began writing again, only this time, what appeared on the board wasn't just difficult, it was infamous. This problem wasn't listed in any textbook. It was a problem the math department's brightest minds had quietly debated for years without resolution. Graves had once joked with colleagues that it was the kind of problem that could make or break a career. Yet now, He offered it up to the boy they all thought was a joke. "Since you're on a roll," Graves added, stepping aside, arms folded. Mason's eyes flickered, reading the equation. For a heartbeat, uncertainty threatened to crack his composure, but then, like flipping a switch, he exhaled and stepped toward the board. His hand gripped the chalk firmly. The room, packed with students who had labeled him as nothing more than lazy, held its collective breath. As the first lines appeared on the board, the room fell into a heavy, expectant silence. Unlike the first two problems, this one pushed Mason to the edge. He paused for a second, staring, but then, almost visibly, the pieces clicked in his head like tumblers on a lock. His hand moved again, faster this time. His classmates leaned forward, mouths slightly agape. It wasn't just that he was solving it, he was making it look easy. Every symbol, every formula flowed without hesitation, without correction. It was like he wasn't solving it at all, but recalling something already known. Professor Graves, watching, slowly uncrossed his arms. His eyes darted between the lines and Mason's face. His instincts screamed that this wasn't right. Mason wasn't just solving, he was navigating the depths of a problem that no one in that room, maybe no one on campus, had cracked. It didn't add up. When Mason finally placed the chalk down, silence roared louder than any applause ever could. "All done," he said again, but this time without the slightest hint of bravado. Graves took an uneasy step forward, inspecting every mark. He adjusted his glasses, traced the logic line by line, and when he reached the conclusion, his expression darkened with disbelief. He turned to Mason, voice hoarse. How did you know this?" Mason simply shrugged. "I just do," he said. In that stillness, a quiet tension settled over the room. Mason had just crossed a line. This wasn't about being clever anymore. Graves and everyone else present knew instinctively. This was something bigger, something no one could yet explain. Before anyone could fully process what had just happened, the classroom door slammed open with the force of a thunderclap. Heads whipped around to see a man in a tailored black suit stride in, his presence like a cold wind sweeping through the room. His expression was unreadable, but the sharpness in his eyes told everyone that this wasn't some curious administrator or passing visitor. He was here with a purpose. Without acknowledging the stunned students, he scanned the chalkboard, reading Mason's solution with alarming focus. The tension in the room thickened as the man's lips pressed into a thin, grim line. Then his gaze shifted directly to Mason. "You, come with me," he said flatly. Mason blinked. "Excuse me?" The man didn't flinch. "Now." The students exchanged wide-eyed glances. Whispers darted across the room like sparks from a frayed wire. Professor Graves stepped forward, voice trembling slightly, but still carrying authority. "Who exactly are you?" he demanded. The suited man calmly reached into his pocket and produced a badge. "Agent Carter, Department of Defense." The room froze. Graves' expression shifted from annoyance to sheer disbelief. "The Department of Defense? What could they possibly—" "Professor," Agent Carter interrupted, tone cutting. "We'll discuss this elsewhere. Mason, grab your things." His tone brooked no argument. The color drained from Mason's face. The professor turned to him. "Don't move, son. You don't have to go anywhere until we sort this out." Carter, unfazed, took another step forward. "Yes, he does." The air inside the classroom turned suffocating. Students who moments ago had laughed at Mason now stared, as if he were radioactive. Mason stood frozen, heart pounding in his chest like a drum. Was this even real? The gravity of the situation hadn't fully hit, but one thing was clear. Something about those equations had triggered forces far beyond this campus, and Mason wasn't sure if he was ready to find out why. Mason's legs felt like they were moving on their own as he followed Agent Carter out of the room, past the dumbfounded faces of his classmates and the stunned gaze of Professor Graves. Every step down the cold, echoing hallway felt heavier than the last. His mind raced. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some elaborate university stunt. Something serious was happening, and somehow He was in the middle of it. As they exited the building, the late autumn air hit him like a slap, but it did little to snap him out of the haze. Waiting at the curb was a black SUV, tinted windows hiding whatever or whoever was inside. Agent Carter opened the door without a word, motioning for Mason to get in. Mason hesitated. "Am I being arrested?" he asked, forcing his voice to stay steady. Carter's lips barely twitched. "No. But you're coming with us." Once inside, Mason found himself seated between Carter and another agent, this one younger, stone-faced, and equally intimidating. The silence in the vehicle was unbearable, broken only by the quiet hum of the engine and the soft static of a two-way radio. Mason clenched his fists. "What is this about?" he finally blurted. Carter gave a measured glance. "The equations you solved? They weren't just numbers on a board." Mason frowned. "They were problems from class." "Wrong," Carter said sharply. "One of them wasn't supposed to be on the board at all. It was an encrypted sequence, classified, and you solved it without even knowing what it was?" Mason's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, classified?" The younger agent handed Carter a file, who flipped it open and slid it toward Mason. Inside were pages of schematics, algorithm breakdowns, and redacted reports, all bearing the unmistakable watermark. U.S. Department of Defense. Restricted. Mason's throat tightened. This wasn't just a complex math problem. It was something the government had been working on, or protecting. "Why was it in my classroom?" Mason whispered. Carter didn't answer. His silence said more than words could. As the SUV turned sharply into an underground facility lined with guards and surveillance cameras, Mason realized one chilling truth. His life was no longer ordinary, and he wasn't sure it would ever be again. The SUV rolled to a halt inside a fortified underground parking structure, its concrete walls lined with armed guards who stood motionless, watching as Mason stepped out under Carter's watchful eye. The sheer scale of the facility sent a chill down Mason's spine. It wasn't just a government building, it was something much deeper, more secretive. Carter led him past security checkpoints and steel-reinforced doors until they reached a narrow corridor with fluorescent lights that flickered ominously. Finally, they entered a sterile briefing room where another man waited, older, grayer, and clearly in charge. His badge read, Agent Mills. Agent Mills gave Mason a long, analytical look before speaking. "We've been monitoring you for some time," he said calmly, sliding a thick file onto the table. "What you did today wasn't just impressive, it was impossible. You cracked a code embedded in an encrypted model related to quantum decryption, one that top-level cryptographers haven't solved in over a decade." Mason's palms grew clammy. I didn't know it was anything like that. I thought it was a test problem." Carter and Mills exchanged glances. Mills leaned forward. "It wasn't. That equation wasn't put on the board by your professor. We suspect it was leaked or planted, and you solved it without breaking a sweat." Mason's head swam. "Planted? By who?" Mills' eyes narrowed. "That's what we're trying to find out." Mason's pulse pounded. He wasn't just caught in the middle of something big, he was part of it. The agents weren't looking at him like he was a lucky student, they were looking at him like he was a key to unlocking a much larger puzzle. And for the first time, Mason realized that his instinct with numbers might be more than just a knack. "You have a gift," Carter said quietly, "and people are going to want it." Mason suddenly understood. The danger wasn't just the problem he solved, it was who might be watching him now. Mason's stomach knotted as he sat across from the two agents, both staring at him like he was less of a person and more of a ticking time bomb. Agent Mills slid another document across the table, a surveillance photo. Mason's eyes widened. It was a grainy image of the problem he had solved, scribbled hastily on the professor's board, but faintly in the corner was a watermark. A symbol Mason didn't recognize. Mills pointed to it. "This symbol is tied to a classified research facility working on experimental artificial intelligence. Mills said grimly. What you solved wasn't just an old math problem, it was the security model protecting that research. Mason's throat tightened. Are you saying I hacked them? By accident. Not hacked, Carter corrected. You unraveled it effortlessly. That makes you valuable. And dangerous. Mason's mind reeled. It wasn't just that he had solved a problem, it was that the problem was never meant to be solved, at least not by someone like him. So why me? He whispered. Why did I see the answer when nobody else could? Mills and Carter exchanged a look. Carter leaned in. That's what we want to know. We've pulled your records, your test scores, your background. On paper, you're just average. But somehow, you cracked a code that the best minds in the world have failed to. Mason's pulse hammered. He wanted to believe it was a fluke, a lucky guess. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Ever since he was a kid, numbers didn't just make sense to him. They spoke to him, like invisible patterns only he could see. But he had always brushed it off, thinking it was just a quirky way of thinking. Is this why you're here? Mason's voice trembled. To recruit me? Mills nodded. Not just recruit, contain if necessary. Mason's breath hitched. The word contain echoed ominously. Suddenly, this wasn't about grades or scholarships, it was about control. His gift had turned him from an underachieving student into something the government couldn't ignore. And now, sitting in that cold, sterile room, Mason realized the most terrifying truth yet. He might never get to choose what came next. If you want me to continue with paragraph 7, just say, continue. The sterile silence inside the room tightened like a noose around Mason's neck. Agent Mills flipped another page in the thick file, this time revealing a security log. Mason's breath caught when he saw it. The same equation he had solved, except this version wasn't scribbled on a blackboard. It was part of a classified document labeled Omega Lock. Agent Carter's voice was low but sharp. Omega Lock is the encryption that guards the most sensitive data the government has. Nuclear codes, intelligence archives, experimental AI, it's all buried behind this. Mason blinked. His throat went dry. You're telling me I just cracked the code, protecting the country's most classified secrets? Carter didn't flinch. Not just this country. Omega Lock is part of an international defense network. What you solved was the foundational piece. A sickening wave of realization hit Mason. His idle scribbles in Graves' class hadn't just unlocked some bonus points. They had potentially dismantled a safeguard meant to protect the entire world. Mason's voice trembled. But I didn't know. Mills leaned back. Intentions don't matter now. What matters is you're the only one who could do it. His tone darkened. And you did it without even knowing what you were looking at. Mason's head spun. His classmates had called him lazy, Graves had called him irresponsible, but none of them could have guessed that hidden beneath his careless facade was something far more dangerous. A mind capable of breaking what wasn't supposed to be broken. As the agent studied him like a specimen under glass, Mason realized they weren't just interested. They were afraid. For the first time, he understood why. He hadn't solved a puzzle, he had pulled the pin from a grenade, and now everyone was scrambling to figure out whether he'd throw it or hand it back. Agent Mills stood, fixing his tie. From this moment on, your life as you knew it is over. He gestured to Carter. You'll come with us, and we'll decide what happens next. Mason's instinct screamed for him to run. But where could he go when the people staring at him controlled everything? Mason's pulse raced as he was led down a narrow, dimly lit hallway beneath the facility. The air felt heavier the deeper they went, like he was descending not just underground, but into a different world entirely. Agent Mills walked beside him, silent and unreadable, while Agent Carter trailed behind, eyes sharp, watching Mason's every move. Every turn, every locked steel door they passed deepened the sense that there was no way out of this. Finally, they entered a secure room. In the center stood a massive digital screen displaying layers of complex code and symbols. Omega Lock. Only now Mason realized it wasn't just a lock. It was alive, shifting and pulsing like a breathing organism. The sight made his stomach turn. Carter pointed to the screen. Your solution rewrote part of this without triggering its defense systems. No one else has been able to do that. Mason blinked. So, you want me to finish it? Mills gave a small nod. Yes. Because, whether you meant to or not, you're now the only one who can. Mason stepped closer, instinctively analyzing the chaotic patterns, the shapes, the gaps. They called to him like an unfinished melody. He could feel it, the puzzle reaching out, waiting for him to solve it. But something deeper told him that solving it might be the worst mistake of his life. His voice came out barely above a whisper. What happens if I do? Agent Carter and Mills exchanged a look, the silence between them louder than words. Finally, Mills answered, It unlocks everything. Mason's blood ran cold. He could see it clearly now. Not just government files, but the power to collapse or control entire systems. Finance, defense, communications. Omega Lock wasn't just a safeguard, it was the key to the world's most sensitive secrets. Mason stepped back. No, I'm not doing it. Mills's eyes narrowed. You don't have a choice. But Mason did. In that moment, standing alone against the weight of 2 agents and the world's most powerful algorithm, he knew the scariest part wasn't that they wanted him to finish it. The scariest part was that he could. And the question gnawed at him like a splinter in his mind. Should he? Mason stood frozen, the screen before him flickering softly as if beckoning him to complete the impossible. His thoughts spun wildly. Could he really finish it? And more importantly, should he? His breathing grew shallow as he turned to Mills and Carter. What happens if I refuse? Mason asked, forcing the words through the lump forming in his throat. Mills' expression darkened. That's not an option, Mason. Carter, however, softened just for a heartbeat. We don't want to hurt you. But this algorithm, it's bigger than you, bigger than all of us. Mason's eyes darted back to Omega Lock. He could already see the patterns connecting, the gaps filling themselves in his mind. The solution was there, lingering just behind his eyes like it had been waiting for him all along. But his gut screamed to stop. What does it unlock? He asked again, this time firmly. Mills exhaled sharply. Everything. Every military system, every government safeguard, every private database on the planet, global defense networks, nuclear protocols. Omega Lock is the skeleton key. Mason's heart sank. This wasn't about some academic challenge. It was about power, the kind no one should possess. He realized then that they didn't just need him, they couldn't do it without him. And that terrified him more than anything. In the stillness of that cold, sterile room, Mason understood that the next choice he made wouldn't just change his life, it might change the world. And with 2 agents staring him down, convinced he was their key to absolute control, he knew the real battle had only just begun. Mason's pulse thundered in his ears as he stared at the terminal. The cursor blinked expectantly, almost mocking him. He could solve it. He knew he could. The lines, patterns, and sequences whispered to him like an unfinished symphony. But finishing it would hand over the keys to unimaginable power. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. Carter's voice was soft but firm. Mason, you don't have a choice. But Mason realized in that moment that he did. Maybe not the kind of choice they expected, but a choice nonetheless. His mind flashed to Graves's words earlier. The world's not ready for what you can do. Mason's breath steadied. He slowly reached toward the keyboard, not to type, but to disconnect the system. In a single motion, he yanked the terminal's main cable free. The room erupted. Mills cursed and lunged forward. Carter's eyes widened in disbelief. What have you done? Mason stepped back, chest heaving, defiant. I made my choice. For the first time since this all began, Mason wasn't just reacting. He was in control. And though he didn't know what would happen next, he knew one thing. He wouldn't be their pawn. Not now, not ever. This story isn't just about mathematics or secret organizations. It's about the power of choice. Mason showed us that, even when the world tries to box you in, you always have the ability to decide who you are and what you stand for. In a time when many feel pressured to conform or accept what's handed to them, Mason's courage is a reminder that true strength comes from within. His choice to resist wasn't just about stopping a dangerous technology. It was about protecting the future, even when the easier path was to comply. We all face moments where we must choose between what's easy and what's right. Mason chose right, and so can we. If you found value in this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who could use a reminder of the power of standing firm. Thank you for watching.